Our introductory session will discuss the document and human fraternity, and in particular, the adoption of a culture of dialogue as the path, mutual cooperation as the code of conduct, and reciprocal understanding as the method and standard. And to understand the document even more, our resource speaker will be presenting the Human Fraternity document in 11 thesis statements. For the topic, 11 thesis statements on the document and human fraternity for world peace and living together, let us welcome our esteemed resource speaker, the chair of the Theology Department of the Ateneo de Davao University, Mr. Roy L. Kimba, PhD, RN. Let's give him a virtual round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very much excited for today's session and very happy also to see Father Joel and Secretary Galvez, as very familiar faces and friends now and colleagues in the Ateneo, as well as new faces, our guest. I also noticed that there are some of you who already came to our previous sessions before. So welcome to this session again on the fundamentals of what human fraternity is. There's also a mixed feeling of excitement and a sense of nervousness because our Father President is here, Father Joel Tabora. So I will invite Father Joel if he could add later after my talk some more points about human fraternity. All right, let me share my screen. So this has been my fourth presentation about what human fraternity is. And actually, this is just quite a short document, but the way I will approach this presentation is to show to you in a way, by way of 11 thesis statements, just to make it very digestible and relatable also for our audience. There were some in the previous sessions, there were some questions about, are you talking about Fratelli Tutti, or is human fraternity an entirely different document? So I would like to begin by giving a distinction between the two, because there might be danger that you might be confusing these two documents. And in these columns, you would find here some key distinctions about the documents. In terms of the content, obviously, Fratelli Tutti is a longer document. This document was actually an encyclica by Pope Francis issued last October 3, 2020. It has 8 chapters, 285 sections, and 288 footnotes. And it has 8 chapters, and then it ends with an appeal and a prayer to the Creator and ecumenical Christian prayer. But what is very interesting is this. The Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together document preceded the Fratelli Tutti. In fact, if you would explore the literature about the inspirations behind Fratelli Tutti, it was Pope Francis himself who said that the Fratelli Tutti document, which was with a Catholic encyclical, was actually inspired by the Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together document. And the further difference between the two documents is that the Human Fraternity document is a joint declaration, both by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar in Abu Dhabi on February 4th, 2019. And this is just a short document. It's a 6-page document, and the parts simply include an introduction, the exposition of the document itself with the conclusion and the signatories at the end of the document. And obviously, if it's going to be a joint declaration, of course, there are committees behind the scene working about the draft, brainstorming, sharing their insights, and then eventually coming up to a consensus for presentation to the Pope and to the Grand Imam, and eventually, when they agreed what was written in the document, finally they were able to set the ceremonial signing and launching of the document. So that's how it is. Unlike with the Fratelli Tutti, it was only on the part of Pope Francis, wherein the whole process takes place. But like I said earlier, the Fratelli document was inspired by this human fraternity for world peace and living together. In fact, Pope Francis, in one of his interviews, said that the Fratelli Tutti was actually a Catholic exposition, a Catholic articulation, further articulation about the human fraternity document. So I hope as early as this, you will not confuse the Fratelli document and the human fraternity for world peace and living together. All right. But joint declarations or accounts of human fraternity by world leaders or significant persons from different religious groups and orientations were not something new in the 21st century, because way back 700 years ago, there was already something historical and something significant that took place. And it was in the 13th century that the first encounter the encounter between Saint Francis of Assisi and the Sultan Al-Kamil of Egypt took place. So one could say that the meeting of the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar and Pope Francis in 2019 is like a deja vu, in the sense that here the meeting of two significant persons from the Catholic Church and from Islam happened again, recurred again, but albeit in a different context, albeit in a different call and a different need, based on our contemporary context. So a little bit of a background about the signatories of the Joint Declaration of the Human Fraternity document. These are signed by the following, by Pope Francis, the head of the Catholic Church. He is the 266th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. His full name is Jorge Mario Bergoglio. And on the other side, we have here His Eminence Sheikh Dr. Ahmad Muhammad Al-Tayyib. He is the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar University, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar Mosque. And if you are interested further to study about this document, how it was made, who were the people involved, how many drafts were made, and what are their ongoing activities, what are their ongoing initiatives, kindly check this website, www.forhumanfraternity.org/our mission. There you can find a collection of literature and documentation about this entire encounter. All right, so let me now go to the 11 thesis statements of this human fraternity document. Number one, I think this is the foundational of all. The eyes of faith recognizes that we are all brothers and sisters, equal in worth and dignity. And here I would like to expand this thesis, mostly from the Catholic perspective, because I would be talking here about the rudiments of fundamental of divine revelation from the perspective of the Catholic Church. Recall that in the book of Genesis, there are two versions of creation story. And I think all of us are familiar with this, that in the first version, we have there an account of the 7 days of creation, where the seventh day God took a rest. On the 6th day, it was there that God created human beings. On the second version of creation, we are simply told about the creation of a man and a woman. Although these differences of creation narratives do not contradict with each other, because as far as the biblical perspective is concerned, these creation stories are not actually historical, in the sense that when God was creating something, somebody was recording, and it would be futile to think about. It would be nonsensical to talk about such an idea, no? But I think it's good to remember, as far as the nature of the Bible, the books of the Bibles are concerned, when these two versions of creation stories in the Bible were written, They were actually written from different traditions. They were written from writers of different theological background, different theological orientation. In the first version of creation, it was said there that in the sixth day, God created the first human beings out of clay, out of the earth, and fashioned them according to the and fashioned these first human beings according to God's image and likeness. And I want you to remember that one. God created the first human beings based after the image and likeness of God. And in the second verse of the creation story, it was quite different because um, in that second version, we know the story that God said that it's not good for man to be lonely, and then God created this woman taken from the rib of a man. Was it literal? Obviously not. What is the meaning of that? Biblical exegetes would say that the understanding should not be geared towards a political understanding about uh, the idea of equality in the sense of rights, in the sense of which one is more powerful, authority. That's that's a misconception about that second version of a creation story. The proper understanding, according to the consensus of biblical scholars, is that the taking of the ribs of the man in order to create the woman simply said that from the very start, the man and the woman were meant to be one. That from the very start, man and the woman, same bone of, it says there in the text, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. From the very start, they are equal in worth and in dignity. And then further in that story, we come to learn later that if it is simply about man being fashioned about this mold of clay, they would be lifeless. And so in the story, we're told that God breathed into the nostril. God breathed into the nostril of man. That breath of God is in Hebrew referred to as ruah. Ruah, R-U-A-H. It simply means the breath of God. And here you can sense a very intimate sharing of the self of God, a part of God, to the first human beings. To the first human beings. And again, I caution you in thinking about historical persons because, again, going back to the biblical exegesis, even the word Adam comes from the Hebrew word Adamah. Adamah simply means soil, clay. So that it represents not a particular historical person, but it represents, in general, the entire humanity. Adam, Adamah, soil, humanity. So we have here, in these two verses of creation story, a revelation of a God. And we may ask the questions, how come that what prompted God to create? What prompted God to share something about himself or herself? And all other related questions. Again, I go back to the exegesis now of biblical scholars. Number one, it says there is nothing in man or there's nothing in the world that coerce, that would necessitate God for him to create something. But accordingly, it was really out of abundance, out of the abundance of God that he created something from nothing. Or some would say from ordering chaos, from chaos to order. So it was that kind of a revelation of a God who created without conditions, without expectations in return, that reveals something about this God. And then God, when he breathed into the nostril of man, God shared a part of himself. And you try to recall also further in the chapters of Genesis, especially the story of the fall of man, when You know the story, the classic story of Adam and Eve tempted to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God is displayed there in a very anthropomorphic language. When you say anthropomorphic language, God was personified, described like a human being walking in the garden, talking with Adam and Eve, asking how they are, asking why they were hiding, and so on and so forth. So God was quite intimate. God was quite proximate. God was quite close to these human beings. So that one could say that here we have a God who socializes, who relates, who is connecting to people, who is concerned with people. And so when you talk about faith, when you talk about faith, faith, therefore, is first and foremost a gift of divine self-offering. One could never say about faith unless one is able to discover this gift of God. One could never speak about faith in the real sense if one is unable to discover this giftedness of a loving God, this giftedness of a God of abundance, of a God who is selfless. And that is a gift. That is a gift. Further, in that story, when when Adam and Eve now violated the prohibition, eat anything in this garden except the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And yet we know the rest of the story that they indeed violated that one and they were hiding and they said, God, we are hiding because we're naked. And God said, who told you that you are naked? And the woman said, and Adam said, because of the woman that you gave me. And God turned to the woman, woman, what have you done? And the woman said, because of that serpent. So it's a classic human attitude of scapegoating and blaming other people for our faults. And yet, towards the end of the story, before God banished them from the Garden of Eden, God clothed them. God clothed them. And it's not a cloth, it's not, the gesture of clothing God was even made special because when Adam and Eve were hiding, they were just taking leaves to cover their private parts because it was a symbol of nakedness, a symbol of shame, a symbol of guilt. But God was according to the text, he sewed fig leaves, the skin of an animal to cover them. And this act, this gesture of clothing them is a gesture of mercy, is a gesture of mercy and forgiveness to these erring human beings, Adam and Eve. So that before they were sent forth for banishment, God clothed them. And yet God allowed them to suffer the consequences of their actions, to suffer the consequences of their violations. Even then, it demonstrated that God truly loves them, that God truly cares for them. And there are a lot of stories that we could cite in the Bible just to substantiate that one. So, faith both is a gift of divine self-offering. But on the other hand, when we receive God in our lives, or when are able to recognize this gift of God of abundance, this gift of God of selfless disclosure, it also becomes a task that invites a response, that calls us to a specific response. A task that spells a particular responsibility to a particular way of witness in our word, in our action. In our word, in our action. And then the second line here states, we are all brothers and sisters. I specifically capitalize the word all, brothers and sisters, here because in the creation story, it simply said God created man according to his image and likeness. God did not say God created the Catholics according to his image and likeness. Nor did God say God created the Muslims according to his image and likeness. Nor did God say God created the Hindus or the Buddhists according to his image and likeness. It simply said God created man according to his image and likeness. And that should be a source of comfort for all of us, regardless of our differences, regardless of our faith confession, regardless of our gender even, regardless of our orientation, our geography, our nationality. It says all. And recall the biblical etymology of the word Adam. Adam is from the word Adama, which means soil. It represents the entire humanity, not specific person belonging to a particular religious group or sect. And then recall in the second creation account, equal in worth and dignity, when God breathed into the nostrils of man, again, it did not specify a person of a specific religious confession. It simply says man and woman. And in the language of in the biblical language, when you talk about man and woman, you always speak about totality. We call that one in the Bible merism. No? Merism. When you talk about heaven and earth, you talk about everything. You talk about man and woman, you talk about totality. So everybody, man, woman, from the very start, were created equal in worth and dignity. And I think this is really a foundational truth that we all need to embrace, that we all need to affirm and be reminded over and over again when we deal with our brothers and sisters who might happen to be in different religious confession and faith tradition. That's the first thesis. By the way, please feel free to intervene if you have clarifications or questions now while we discuss the 11th thesis. The second one, to help the innocent, the poor, the forgotten, and the ones who are in most need is a duty required of all persons. Like I said earlier, faith is a gift, but it is also a responsibility. And as I said also earlier, the document Fraternity had its inspiration from this human fraternity document. And in the Fraternity document, it tells about the story of the parable of the Good Samaritan. You know the story of the parable of the Good Samaritan, no? There was this innocent person who was a victim of robbery, and then he was lying there on the street, wounded. And according to the story, there was a priest who passed by and simply ignored him. And then there was a Levite, a tax collector who passed by and yet again ignored him. And there was the Samaritan. Samaritan during the time of Jesus was considered to be unclean, victim of a lot of negative associations, and perhaps one of the first victims of fake news during their times. And yet here we are, a Samaritan who was least expected to help, was the very one who helped the victim lying on the road. And the context of the story was Jesus was asked, who is my neighbor? And so Jesus told the story about the parable of the Good Samaritan. Your neighbor, our neighbor, is the one who is in need. So when it comes to our responsibility towards our neighbors, again, our identity, a religious identity, political identity even, matters less. Matters less. Because when you talk about our neighbors, we're, we're responding to our neighbor because we believe that that is a human person. We believe that that human person is also like us, special to God, who somebody who inherited the breath of God, the grace of God, fashioned after the image and likeness of God, and so on and so forth. Further, in Catholic moral theology, this is also the reason why, even if a person is already in the vegetative state in the hospital or lying in comatose for several months, never ever in the Catholic Church we endorse euthanasia or mercy killing, because the physiological condition of the human being is not really essential to does not really alter the essential element, the essential dignity and worth of every human person. And again, no, second thesis states that in our response, in our witness of faith, in our care, in our search, no, to the question, who is my neighbor? Our neighbor is the one who is in greatest need. And according to the Human Fraternity document, so the innocent, the poor, the forgotten, and the ones who are in most need. Number three, human fraternity embraces all human beings, unites them, and renders them equal. I think it's quite a similar point from 1 and 2 here. I'm just checking the time if I'm over talking again. Thesis number 4, both parties, referring to the Pope Francis and the Grand Imam Al-Azhar, appeal to leaders and policymakers of the world in the promotion of tolerance, respect, and peaceful coexistence, in the prevention of conflict, war, and moral decadence. We live in a world, we live in a what they refer as the VUCA world. We live in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, VUCA world. And way back now in the early 2000, when there was the rise of terrorism, with the famous Bin Laden, the bombing of the Twin Tower, and escalated in different parts of the world, especially in the Middle East. And a lot of people were really caught off guard by that. But at the same time, when we saw, for example, group of Islamic scholars and imams condemning radical and fundamentalist factions of Islam, justifying the use of violence in the name of Allah, this group of Islamic scholars and imams issued categorical statements of condemnation because of this violence, because of this erroneous interpretation of Islam. But further, in the middle of 2010 to 2020, we saw the rise also of white supremacist group in the US, in Europe. And one could say that when you talk about discrimination, you talk about violence, anybody could be its perpetrator, anybody could be its victim. And so this appeal is very much relevant. An appeal that transcends not only to religious leaders, but more so to political leaders. And this is all the more very much vivid now when we talk about the context in the US, about President Trump and the rise of the supremacists and white supremacists and so on and so forth. But of course, we will not dwell on that now because that could be another topic. Number 5, the most important causes of modern crisis stem from desensitized human conscience, a distancing from religious values and an individualism accompanied by materialistic philosophies. What about this desensitized human conscience? It made me recall a particular text in the Catechism for Filipino Catholics, wherein it says, actually from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, where it says, the great sin of this century is the loss of the sense of sin. I repeat that. The great sin of this century is the loss of the sense of sin. I think that speaks well about our desensitized human conscience. And this is further aggravated, for example, with the rise of social media. We know that social media could be a tool for good, but at the same time, social media could also have a desensitizing effect on us. For example, when we see images and pictures about the ongoing hunger in Yemen, nobody was paying attention to that. All eyes were set about the war in Ukraine. It's not a bad thing, but it's the least maybe that we should. It's it's just one of the many things that we are facing nowadays. There are also violence in Myanmar, the displacement of people in Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. And repeated exposure to these photos online, no, somehow would make us desensitized. It is as if we're just watching at the news and does that really require anything from us? Where in fact it is supposed to disturb us. Where in fact it is supposed to call us into a particular action. And there is one thing wherein I was able to watch about the documentary about stateless persons. When we speak about the stateless person, these are the persons without a state, without a national identity, without rights, without a country to call on their own. And much of them are living in the borders between Pakistan and India. And it's really very disturbing because this has been going on for decades. And we even have the United Nations. And yet nobody seemed to care about these people. Why? Are we just so engrossed with something else or with something more other than these poor people who are in greatest need? Who will be the ones to save them, who will listen to them, who will take care of them? Stateless persons have no political leaders, no country. What will happen to them? What about their children? What about their education? What about their health care? What about their food, their housing? In this part of the world, we are very lucky because we have a government. It's not perfect. It has its share of strength and weakness and shortcomings and achievements and so on and so forth. But in that part of the world, when you talk about stateless persons, what's their future? What's their present even, if we may ask? So I think these things are supposed to disturb us, are supposed to inspire us to come together to have a collective response. And this is really the wisdom of the Human Fraternity document, because the openness that the Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar is not something openness to somebody who is like you or to somebody who is similar to you. The kind of openness that is invited, that is asked from us, required from us, is what Pope Francis is saying as existential openness. existential openness to treat everybody as our neighbor. Existential openness, meaning when we deal with people, we treat them as they are, with equal share of dignity and a sense of worth. So this existential openness can be likened to the power of the Good Samaritan. Who is my neighbor? Everybody is our neighbor, especially those who are in greatest need. Next thesis. There exists an unacceptable silence and indifference of the majority of the world's poor and the vulnerable by the minority rich and powerful of the world. This is what is referred by Pope Francis as the attitude, the world of indifference. We're living in a world of indifference, perhaps because we are so distracted by the seeming unlimited choices that this world can offer, but mostly to feast our senses, mostly to satisfy our senses and desires, mostly to pressure us to conform to what social media defines as perfect and ideal. But there is a greater problem that requires an existential crisis. But how could we respond to this if our desensitized human conscience have been used to an existence of indifference? And I think this is one of the tragedy of our contemporary world. We are so advanced in our technology, in our weaponry, as demonstrated in the ongoing war in Ukraine and Russia. And yet, have we advanced in our values, in our virtues? Have we advanced in our care for those who are poor? Have we advanced in showing concern for those who are needy? Even by just looking at our immediate neighborhood, have we done enough? If the answer is yes, then that's good. Continue doing that. If not, then one could say, then one should ask, are you a victim or a perpetrator of this indifference? And also, one could speak also today of the global south, who are majority are poor, talking about Latin America, Africa, and poor countries in Asia, and the global north, Europe, the Canada, US, and other first world countries who are enjoying so much of the resources. And that's why the first world countries are always criticized of hypocrisy, because of much of the resources of the world, if you try to go it by a quantitative analysis, much of the resources and wealth of the world belong to them. And in fact, when you talk about zillionaires and billionaires, 90% of the world's of the world's wealth now belong to this group of people, and yet the 90% of the world population remain either in the middle class or the ones who are really poor. So this is really a challenging call for everybody, and I hope this is also a message that hopefully you could consider to be one of your reflections. Number 7, the aim of religions is to believe in God, to worship God, not to use the name of God to terrorize people or to justify discrimination, violence, and extremism. And again, I would like to lead you back to the story of the first creation story, 2 versions of the creation story. There was nothing there about violence. when God created everything, it was really in proper harmony. Man in harmony with God, man in harmony with himself, man in harmony with another human being, man in harmony with nature. That was the vision of God. That was the gift of God. And yet, how come that some people use the name of God to terrorize people? As if weaponizing our religious belief. That's not the aim of religion. When you speak about Jesus Christ was tortured. He was hung on the cross. He was pierced on his side, and he died the most humiliating death that a human being could suffer. You talk about Islam. Islam per se means peace. Then how come that a few people would invoke the name of God to terrorize people or to advocate violence? It's a betrayal of their faith. It's a betrayal of their religion. It's a betrayal of God himself. So I think this should be clear. And when Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar were signing this document in Abu Dhabi, that sent a powerful signal to the entire Christian and Arab world when you talk about God. When you talk about God. Number 8, the protection of all places of worship is a duty guaranteed by religions, human values, laws, and international agreements. And something that was really beautifully and powerfully affirmed now by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam. So I think this is very self-explanatory. Number 9, terrorism in all its forms and expressions must be condemned. Terrorism could be, joining these radical groups, taking part of planning an actual attack. Or terrorism could also be financing these terrorist groups. Or terrorism could be being accomplices to particular groups in their operations through giving information or withholding information. So it could be through action or it could be inaction. So in all its forms, Pope Francis and the Grand Imam are saying it should be condemned and should never be tolerated. Full citizenship is based on the equality of rights and duties, especially women, children, and the elderly. And I think this is really one of the key highlights of our conference these days now, that it's not only about the witness of faith that we foster existential openness. It's not simply about our faith that we foster full citizenship, responsibility towards one another, but it's also a kind of an embodiment of what it means to be a good citizen, respecting the rights and duties of other people. And in this conference, I think I heard during the last session that there were certain programs and initiatives about women empowerment, about responding to the needs of the children and the vulnerable and also the elderly. So congratulations to all the groups have been sustaining these initiatives and works. And finally, both parties, Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, declared the adoption of the culture of dialogue as the path, mutual cooperation as the code of conduct, and reciprocal understanding as method and standard. In other words, dialogue should be the first and last. Dialogue should be the first and last in our way of life, in our engagement with one another. Dialogue should be exhausted in all our encounters. Dialogue should be our ultimate intervention, solution steps whenever we engage with other people, regardless of our background, regardless of our differences. And hopefully that would bring us to cooperation. And regardless of the kind of expertise, the kind of work that you are partaking, whether you're a teacher, a volunteer worker, or a worker in the government, or in the private sector, there are many forms and witnesses of dialogues. And when we in theological parlance, there's what we refer as the dialogue of life. No? It's a life that is being witnessed on a daily basis, no? In our workplace, at home, in our neighbors. Of course, there are other forms of high level of dialogues about talking about doctrines, no? But those are relegated to the experts in religions. But for most of us, this dialogue of life is a constant invitation, is a constant reminder. All right, so I think I'm done with the 11th thesis. And to my conclusion, why does the human fraternity document matter for the young people of today? Because I've noticed there are young people here in our audience. I would like to especially address them. Number one, because we need to affirm and reaffirm the legitimacy of our diverse theologies. Not only theology, it has to be in the plural, diverse theologies and religious confessions, traditions, and teachings. Not an excuse or justification for proselytism. Now, proselytism means when you talk, I talk to you because I want to convert you to my faith, or you convert me to your faith. When we engage in an encounter, when we engage in a dialogue, it has to be coming from a sincere intention of relationality, with a desire to connect, with a desire to forge relationship, friendship, fraternity. Number two, fraternity challenges us to deepen our faith in God and our understanding and appreciation of our own religious roots as requisite for dialogue. Number three, diversity is an invitation for genuine dialogue, encounter, fraternity, and mutual enrichment, not a threat of our identities and cultures or a justification for conflict and violence. I think this is really one of the tragedy of fundamentalism, radical violent fundamentalism before, wherein they said that this is the only religion that we have, and this is the only proper interpretation that we have. All the rest are wrong, and therefore everybody should kneel down and be converted to the way we interpret this text, this religion. No. Human fraternity celebrates diversity and respects diversity. Diversity is not a threat, it's a strength, it's a gift. It's a reason to celebrate. Number four, we are all accountable to the next generation by passing and handing on our collective treasures and memories through our traditions, teachings, prayers, and rituals. And number five, because we simply need one another as it has been in our past and present generations, and as it will be for our future generations. With that, I end my presentation. I would like to entertain now some comments, suggestions, or some reflections. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Kimba, for presenting the document in Human Fraternity and its thesis statements. So napakaganda no nung mga na-share ni Dr. Kimba on the document in Human Fraternity. It was very inspiring what you said, and it's also an invitation to everyone to actually look at their faith as a gift of a loving God, gaya po ng nasabi ni Dr. Kimba, no? And because we have been gifted by that faith, the eyes of true faith also recognizes the humanity of every person, worthy of dignity and respect. So that was very beautiful and very inspiring. So it's now time for open forum. We will be entertaining 3 questions from the Zoom chat box, or maybe any thoughts that you would like to share or reflections as well. So You can use the raised hand feature found in the lower part of your Zoom application if you want to share or ask your questions. We have Father Joel Tobara.
Oh
Um,
no. Hi, Father.
Hi, Roy. Dr. Roy, good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to thank you for your presentation. I think it was very clear. What I'd like to do is just highlight certain things. The fact that the Fratelli Tutti document, which is an encyclical,
Yeah.
160 pages and very long, it interprets, I think, the document on fraternity for world peace and living together. I don't think it's necessary to read the entire Fratelli Tutti document.
Yeah.
It can help, no? But I think the message of the document on fraternity for world peace and living together, that can present for us already an agenda. The Fratelli Tutti document actually incorporates in the last section, it actually incorporates almost in toto the document on fraternity for world peace and living together. No, I think that's very important. I think what you pointed out, that we are brothers and sisters because we are created by a loving God. We're not brothers and sisters because we're brothers and sisters of Jesus. No.
Yeah.
In this document, we're brothers and sisters because we're created by a loving God. Therefore, everything that you said is correct. No, that we're created in diversity. And the first time I heard that, I was shocked. Because so often we're taught we have to be all the same, and you're not allowed to be different. But the way this is being presented, it's quite revolutionary for me, at least. That we're really created different, and we're created different in order to be able, in our difference, to discover our unity in our fraternity. So the central portion of the of the document on fraternity for world peace is the joint decision to enter into dialogue towards mutual collaboration, towards greater understanding of fraternity. No, it's the fraternity that pushes us into dialogue, and it reaches through dialogue and cooperation and mutual understanding to a deeper understanding of fraternity. So it's an ongoing, as it were, agenda that I think that we would like to understand and own. Part of our dialogue in this agenda is between one another. We try to help one another to understand why we are brothers and sisters in this world, in Mindanao, or in this world of Ukraine and Russia, in this world of Syria and of Israel and Palestine, etc., etc. Why we are brothers and sisters. But at the same time, we are in dialogue with God, who is continually revealing to us, even in our searching and our looking for what it means to be brothers and sisters, God is revealing to us our humanity. So I think these are fundamental concepts for understanding fraternity in the sense of the document for fraternity for world peace and living together. Just as a compliment to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Joel, for reiterating that one. And yeah, I missed that part of saying that it was really incorporated almost in the Fratelli Tutti document. No? And thank you, Father Joel, for reiterating also those key points as part of our ongoing reflection in our conference today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Joel. If there are any other questions or maybe thoughts that you want to share with the group.
Uh, um, Thank you so much, Patricia. Not now, maybe later.
We have Edel Guyano who raised his hand. If you want to
Yeah,
share something.
good morning, Dr. Roy, and thank you for your sharing. I would like just to ask, how do we apply this one in our situation when there is, therefore, I would say the call for continuing peace process in our country should be always be promoted, and what should be the government and the people should be done in order to support this?
Okay. Sir Adil, are you asking specific initiatives here?
The first one is the call for peace process, because there is seems to be division between the government and people. Are we going to continue or not? And as we uh, experience, a lot of dialogues have been stopped and then continue. So if we apply these values and principles of human fraternity, so I
Yeah.
I believe that we will continue.
Yeah.
But how about the people and the government?
Yeah.
How do we?
Yeah. Thank you very much for that thought. Obviously, taking from the perspective of the Human Fraternity document, stopping the possibility of pursuing peace is never and will never be an option. Meaning it has to be continued, it has to be sustained. Now, is it an easy part? Obviously not, because in Mindanao alone, we have quite a history, no, of this dialogue and translating into the establishment of autonomous region, and now we have BARM. So it's really quite a complicated, multi-layered advocacy to pursue. But let's just try to take a look at the gains that we have achieved, no, throughout these decades. And I think to those lives who were sacrificed, to those lives to those people who have given so much, no, for the achievement of peace in Mindanao, I think it rests on us as our responsibility to continue the work that they have been doing since the past, to continue to sustain the work that our predecessors have done in the past. So we always go back to this invitation of a peace process. And I cannot give you the very specific area wherein people should pursue that. But I think I would like to share this one to everybody, that the witness of peace always starts in your immediate context, in your immediate locality, in your world of work, in your world of apostolate and ministry. And there are, like I said, there are many layers of engagement about being a peace advocate. And I think there is also, when we make a concrete response, we have to take also into account the sense of immediacy and proximity that we are in. So maybe that generic guideline could somehow satisfy that the thought that you're sharing there, Sir Eddie. I don't know, we have here now from the government also who would like to share or respond to the thought of Sir Edil, just to enrich the conversation. Anybody? Do we have Pat from OPA Pro?
Yes. If anyone from OPAPU would also maybe share their thoughts or answer to the question raised by Sir Edil. Okay, so there will be a session about the convergence of OPAPRU and the
Okay.
document in human fraternity later on. So maybe
Yeah.
Sir Edel, that will be answered in the next session.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
If we have other questions or maybe thoughts that you want to share, we have time for maybe one or two more people. Okay, so we have a few insights in our chat box. So I would just like to maybe read some of them. So we have from Francis Nia Binta. He says, Dr. Roy, thank you as always for allowing us once more to digest in very relevant statements from the amazing document on human fraternity. I appreciate so much your questions in between, which poke at our hearts. May we be disturbed in our own cocoons in order to be ready to respond innovatively to be advocates of peace wherever we may be. Truly, this is such an amazing day. All glory to God. We also have from Linda Noche. Thank you for sharing analysis highlighting the importance of deepening faith as basis to foster peace and care, concern for brothers and sisters, and resolve towards healing all forms of violence in the world. We have from Ms. Christine Bertucci, if we fully embrace these principles and internalize them and live them out, then we must not be afraid to challenge each other about the hard questions and differences we may have between and among ourselves to bring about justice and reconciliation. Mr. Gus McLat from Initiatives for International Dialogue said, indeed, the Human Fraternity document is revolutionary, as Father Tabara mentioned, that we are all created in the image of God and not either Jesus or the Prophet Muhammad or any other religious icon. Thus, the elephant in the room question then, specifically for Catholics or Christians, is will man and woman be saved even if they don't accept Jesus as their savior? And we have, yes, sir, would you want to say something?
Yeah. So this is a particularly denominational question, but you know, in as far as the Catholic teaching is concerned, I forgot the specific title of the document, but it's the idea is at the end of the day, even those who do not believe in Jesus Christ, at the end of the day, even those who have different religious confession, people will be judged on the last day according to how they submit to their conscience. Because as far as the theology is, the Catholic theology is concerned, we believe that conscience is where the voice of God is, and conscience tells us, directs us towards what is good, towards what is virtuous. And so when we heed to our conscience, then we find the voice of God through our conscience, in our word, in our witness. And this denominational question about question of salvation, if they will not accept Christ, no, that could be an area that could be a further subject of dialogue even among Christians, because you know, to be honest with you, I just last semester I had a student who belongs to a very specific Christian denomination, and when we talk about ecumenism, she told me specifically, sir, in our religious group we don't agree with ecumenical dialogue. There is no place for ecumenical dialogue in our religion, in our denomination. But going through this course on interreligious dialogue and ecumenism made me reconsider and appreciate the importance it cast on me as a believer, as a human being, and its all repercussion on other people. And I think that experience of mine led me to an insight that, yeah, regardless of the kind of differences that we are in our denominational belief and practices, but through continuous dialogue, we come to appreciate the perspective of the other person. We establish rapport, we establish friendship, we establish fraternity, and this is really where Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar were saying that once we are able to converge, once we are able to dialogue, we come to a better understanding of ourselves and of other people. So that even if we maintain those differences, we already have that sense of existential openness to the other people. Now, does that mean that uh, overnight that particular religious group should change their doctrine or not? That's not for you to decide. That's for them to decide. That's for them to ask. That's for them to reflect on. But through an ongoing conversation, somewhere in between, something changed. And that is where the power of dialogue, that is where the power of human fraternity takes its magic, takes its grace, as what Father Joel said earlier. I hope I answered that question, Pat.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. We also have Father Joel raised his hand. He might want to add something.
Yes, Father, please help me.
No, no, I think the question of Gus is very good. But for me, it's Ramadan time now, and I never cease to be edified by Muslim brothers and sisters who, during this period, really fast. I mean, we've experienced them either in situations of study, in situations of meetings, where everybody is eating, but they will not eat because it is not their religious practice to eat during Ramadan, during the daytime. And they do this out of a sense of desiring to come closer to Allah. It's that experience, I think, of a Muslim, which helps me to try to live my own faith a little bit more, with a little bit more integrity, with a little bit more loyalty, with a little bit more truth. And I think that the dialogue begins here when you encounter the faith of another, and the faith of another then allows you somehow to collaborate together, like in working for Madaris schools or in working for peace in Mindanao. And so that through that working together, you learn to understand yourselves more as different and yet as similar. I think that's the dialogue, cooperation, and deeper understanding that the document is coming for. I don't think we're worried about the salvation of the other. We'll let the other take the faith of the other take care of that. Take care of your own. Take care of your own faith and your own salvation, and allow yourself to be enriched by the faith of the other. I think I think this is what is coming to me from the document on fraternity.
Thank you, Father Joel. Very beautifully said, Father. I think that's all the time we have for the questions. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. And once again, thank you very much, Dr. Kimba, for your time and expertise. We would like to present you now with the Certificate of Appreciation. If we may have it. Okay. I just like to read the citation. The Office of the Presidential Advisor on Peace, Reconciliation, and Unity and Ateneo de Davao University presents this certificate of appreciation to Mr. Roy L. Kimba, PhD, RN, for his invaluable contribution as resource speaker during the online conference on healing and reconciliation to moving towards human fraternity, given this 25th day of April 2022. This will then be signed by Secretary Carlito G. Galvez Jr., the Presidential Advisor on Peace, Reconciliation, and Unity, and Father Joel E. Tawara of the Society of Jesus, the President of the Ateneo de Davao University. And that wraps up our discussion for topic 1.